When I was 9 years old, my parents bought a piece of land outside of Tulsa to raise some horses. This is a story about my relationship to winter. This land was a beautiful place, open vistas, Oklahoma sky, and hardly anything that resembled anything other than nature all around us. It was a place that had 9 acres of woods and forest behind us and a ravine that ran to the Arkansas River. But this land needed a lot of work. It had been neglected over the years. And so my family invited friends and others to come and help us to rehabilitate the land, to pick the trash and the dumping that had been going on for decades, to build the fence, to restore the barn, and to welcome our first horses. It was my dad's dream, but he had 2 daughters. Horses need tending, and so guess who did the tending? Horses need to be fed twice a day, even when there's good grazing. And so it fell upon my sister and me to take on this duty. I get up before school around 6:30 a.m. every day to feed the horses and the cats in the barn. And my sister would do it in the afternoon until she left for high school. And then it was me, twice a day. No family vacations because you can't leave the horses. And so what this childhood meant was that I grew very familiar with the passings of the season, because in our barn and in our pastures, I spent a small part of my day, every day, and every season outside. Now, winter was the hardest season. Rolling out of bed in the darkness, finding my way down the hill from the house to the barn, and hoping that the horses would see or hear me and meet me at the barn door. It was a time of beauty where you felt held by the earth. It was mysterious. It was a time when all my senses would come alive as I went down to the barn to greet the animals. But it made my job more difficult. I had to take the hay, break the ice in the giant water container. It took a lot, the water trough. It took a lot to do that in the dark. I found winter, though, over time wasn't something, even though it bit in my hands and challenged me, that it also was a place of refuge as a child that I've been reminded about lately. Winter brought new opportunities in my life as a child. Winter made it possible to roam the woods. Those cold, dark days meant I could explore the forest and the ravine behind our house with less fear of snakes and scorpions and ticks. My mom would allow us to roam for hours as long as we had one of our dogs. I always took my golden retriever, Clifford. I see the Hinkles here. They got the puppy from one of their litters. And that was my companion to wander through the woods. I enjoyed watching the water flow through the stream and breaking the ice. And I found that even though winter revealed the land, it revealed the land in new ways. With the trees stripped bare, the grass growing brown, the sounds changed in the winter. You notice how sound travels differently. The smells changed, the taste of the air, the feel. And now I realize as I'm older, I am changed too, if I only pay attention to winter. Winter on the farm was also about waiting for the ground to thaw, the ice to melt, the power to come back on. We were in rural Bixby Jinx. The cold to slip away, the bright light of the sun to return and increasingly warm my mornings and light my way. Winter in our lives is much the same way when we wait for the bad news to get better. When we look for a new way, when it seems like there is no way, when we realize the hope that we so desperately want may not or cannot happen. And yet still, winter teaches me in these moments, in this moment in my life right now, where I'm feeling very betwixt and between as a dear loved one is nearing the end of his life, that there is still love. There is still life in this in-between. The winter solstice, while it is the official start of winter, simultaneously provides a glimpse of spring and summer as the shift begins from the shortening days and longer nights to a growing daylight, and those nights grow shorter. Day by day, minute by minute, the days grow longer, and it may not seem like a difference today or tomorrow, but 30 or 60 days from now, we'll all feel it together. This year's winter solstice was yesterday. The word solstice, derived from the Latin, literally means sun stand still. And it's because of the phenomena that the sun appears to be sitting still on the solstices, the winter and the summer, for about 8 days, that it rises and it sets in the same place. Have you noticed? Have you been watching? The solstices divide the year into two halves, one full of growing light, one of growing darkness, and the sun waxes and wanes on its earthly yearly journey around it. Long before Christmas and Hanukkah and other holidays in this time of year, a different sort of celebration marked this change in how the days and the nights were balanced. To be sure, there were bonfires and candles, evergreens and gift-giving, miracle stories, and hope. People celebrated the rising of the midwinter sun after the shortest day and the longest night. And fire played a central role in these rites as they attempted to preserve, to coax the sun's strength to return. Complex ceremonies involving dances and rites and sometimes sacrifices to goddesses and gods were part of some traditions. Many used fire and the evergreens to remind them of the bounty of the spring and the summer, something to hope for and look forward to again. Over the centuries, people celebrated winter solstice in many ways with customs and rituals rooted in place and culture. The winter solstice in the desert, of course, is different than England or New England. But many of us often think back to the stories of the solstices and the stone circles in the British Isles, such as Newgrange and Stonehenge, where they mark the solstices for what are likely religious rites. Some felt that they could coax the midwinter sun's light through their actions. They prayed to the gods and the goddesses, and they performed these elaborate rites to secure the sun's return. There was dancing, there was music, there was words and incantations. They also marked the rites of fertility and death and rebirth, a cycle connected to the sun's journey from its waxing and its waning and its waning to its waxing. Solstices were also considered special times, gateways to another world when the otherworldly spirits could come back and roam the earth. It was a time of mystery and magic, fear and joy, celebration and reflection. And it still is, if you want it to be. Many cultures and traditions, old and new, mark and celebrate the winter solstice. In fact, it's still celebrated today. Maybe you yourself or you had friends who talked about selecting a Yuletide log and started burning it, thinking about its connection to last year's log. Maybe it was a remnant. Others who did a ritual on the solstice, letting go of what was no longer serving them and hoping and wishing and writing down and sharing with others what they wanted to grow in their lives. Earth-based spirituality, those who are pagans and neo-pagans continue to have the solstices as a deep-rooted part of their spiritual journey. Marking the solstice in the seasons also opens new ways to reflect on our lives. A colleague reminded me recently that there are seasons in our lives. I know that, but you forget when you're in the winter moment, when you're in the hardest parts. In this capitalist, productivity-driven society, we forget that there are ebbs and there are flows, and that is a part of the beauty. That there are seasons in our lives, just as there are seasons on this earth. And those ebbs and flows are a natural part of living. Our creativity, our thriving. When a time like winter arrives in our lives, when we wait, when we are in the betwixt and between, when it feels like our world has been stripped bare of the delights of spring and summer, or we are so uncertain what spring and summer may even look like, we might think of these places or these moments as a place of failure or a complete loss, rather than a season, a moment, a time of reflection, of rest, of trying new things, of gathering resources. Much as the trees do when they drop their leaves and send the life-giving nutrients to their roots during the winter. So I've been thinking about the solstice and winter, something I'm experiencing in my own life a lot these past few weeks of December as we headed towards the solstice. I was thinking with three readings in particular. Parker Palmer, the Quaker activist, writer who does such wonderful work. Thinking from neo-pagan Steve Schick, who's written about the solstice celebrations. And then thinking as a part of this community, how the solstices, how being in winter together can be a part of our lives and our development as human beings so that we can stretch and grow. Parker Palmer, the Quaker writer and activist, the teacher, he asked on Facebook a post recently, in the beginning of the month, he asked a question after sharing about a picture, a painting he has on his desk. It's from Taos, New Mexico, and it's an image of the Taos Pueblo covered in snow by a native artist who's a part of that community. He writes, the Pueblo, which is one of the first structures built in 1000 CE, is believed to be the oldest continuously inhabited community in the United States, as what we know as the United States today. So the people who call this place home have had to persevere through all kinds of winters, literal and metaphorical. They have done so for a millennium and more. And as Palmer keeps the image of the Pueblo on his desk, not because he's looking for tips and tricks and interpretations from the Red Willow people on how to winter through, he recognizes that their methods are deeply intertwined with their culture and their indigenous practice. He is looking to them and knowing that they have, against greater odds than he will ever face, winter through. He has that picture as a reminder for him to do his own work. The picture on the desk reminds him to find and discover and to identify what he calls his own deep roots in the ground of his own life. Roots that can survive the winter, that keep heart, that keep mind, that keep soul alive. Then emerge and thrive in a form of new life when spring comes. As Palmer reminds us, in case we are in doubt, spring will come, as it always does and always will, but not always in the way we hoped or expected. How do you winter through? How have you wintered through? And to Palmer's question, I add, how do we, as a community, winter through? Whether individual or parts of our community or all of us. Not to get around it, not to get by, not to miss it, but to go deeper. Winter is a special time on the wheel of the year. Despite all the appearances, of course, nature is not dead in winter. It has gone underground to renew itself and prepare for spring. Winter is a time when we can, for ourselves, strip away the things that no longer serve us. As I mentioned earlier, go deeper and look at the resources. Identify the resources we have, write them down, say them to a friend, but also identify the resources that are missing, where we're lacking, and make a plan to rebuild, to connect. It's so important. Right now, if you have any holiday music playing, you might hear that famous tune. It's the most wonderful time of the year. But you don't have to be cheery or filled with merriment. It is also a time of introspection and reflection. It can be a place for forgiveness and healing. It's a time for tending our wounds and opening our eyes and our spirits to those things that can restore, redeem, empower, and strengthen us. And so the second thinker that I was in dialogue in this last month is Steve Schick. He's written different pieces about the winter solstices over the years. This one piece talks about the stone circle in Newgrange, Ireland, in the British Isles. He says, solstice celebrations capture the moment when darkness gives way to light. For thousands of years, people have tried to hold on to that moment of joy and certainty. 5,000 years ago at Newgrange in Ireland, people built a circular chamber to let a shaft of light travel deep into the most central part of that chamber during the winter solstice. Imagine waiting in the darkness and that beam of light breaking through. And there, inside the chamber, intricate drawings, including various symbols and eye-shaped carvings. Constructing shafts for the light to penetrate deeply into the central chambers of our hearts is an effort that must take place in a time of waiting and uncertainty, in a time before the eyes or our other senses begin to be open to see. It's a time when adjustments need to be made. So much of what we do in life depends on how we respond to the waiting moments. How do we respond to this waiting moment? Take this time for peace. Take this time for reflection. Again, naming your resources, naming it, writing it down. Don't just do it in your head. Commit it by sharing it, growing your spiritual practice or meditation or reading and growth. Make those connections and reconnect. Schick also invites us to practice imagining that dawning beam of light of the winter solstice as it makes its way in that chamber, and that chamber then is your heart. That beam of light coming into your heart. To direct this light requires us, as Dag Hammarskjöld suggests, to vanish as an end and remain only as a means, a conduit. No small task. But if you doubt the effectiveness, think of those who've made a difference in your life and what they have selflessly shared and given to you. Sometimes it's just showing up, and that means the world, my friends. Schick invites us to remember that Newgrange and other stone circles were not built by individuals. They were gathering of people who built them together. No solitary individual created the stone circles. And in this way, during winter, it's also a time to join with others to do that work, to bring light and to then reflect it in new ways out in the world. Just in this past month, I've been thinking about the Community Resource Bank packing groceries for needy families in Tulsa. Had the Partners in Education team joined in their over 30-year relationship with our Unity Learning Academy, a part of the Tulsa Public Schools, and serving dinner to that community and seeing the bright eyes and faces of the families as they had this opportunity to share this free meal. And then just this week, also, those donations to the Christmas trees where we were sharing the hats and the gloves and the underwear. The children had the opportunity to shop what was donated for the things that they needed, and they could pick out their favorite colors. All the different ways we touch people's lives. January 6th, I know that date. But that's why our community organizing branch is holding an event that night here to reassert our commitment to Greater Tulsa as a broad-based community organizing group, working on tenants' rights, working on safety for children, getting to school. All the ways that we can show up for one another, how we can show up for ourselves and then reflect that light out into the world. This is a part of the great message of the solstice. And I forgot, climate justice, January 26th. I don't want to forget that. I'm very committed to that. January 26th, we're having a huge climate revival here, and I hope you're a part of it. All these different ways that we can rethink and reconnect and shine that light in the world. And so this morning, on the day after the solstice, as that sunlight so beautifully is showing up for us, and in a very small way has grown just a bit longer, I invite you with this question: will we, in this waiting time, build a chamber where the light can be reflected widely enough so that others can see its beauty? Blessed be, and amen.